Good morning, it's Friday the 15th of September here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, a union representing 150,000 US auto workers goes on strike, hitting three of the country's biggest car makers.
Arms shares jumped by 25% as this year's biggest IPO takes off.
And we take a closer look at how ever wilder weather swings have forced a complete redesign of some of the world's busiest airports.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Workers at America's biggest auto union have gone on strike after a deadline to agree a deal with three major car makers passed. GM, Ford and Stellantis are currently offering pay rises of up to 20% over 4.5 years, but the United Auto Workers wants 36%. The union represents 150,000 workers. Speaking before the deadline passed, its president, Sean Fain, made clear they would not be backing down.
If we need to go all out, we will. Everything is on the table.
One study suggests that even a 10-day strike by Sean Fain's UAW union could cost the US economy $5.6 billion in lost output and push the state of Michigan into recession.
Shares in the UK-based chip designer ARM have climbed 25% after the year's biggest stock listing. Though ARM isn't well known amongst consumers, its technology is almost in every smartphone. The UK government failed in its bid to convince the firm, though, to list in London. But the company's CEO, Rene Haas, has told Bloomberg that he is open to the idea of a secondary listing in Britain.
Yeah, so today, obviously, we're in New York, but we're incredibly proud of our UK heritage, and we are open to considering that down the road.
Haas added that he's confident the company's growth will be sustained. The IPO raised close to $5 billion for investment firm SoftBank, which still owns 90% of ARM.
China's economy is picking up steam as a summer travel boom and Beijing stimulus measures have helped to boost consumer spending and factory output. Industrial and retail sales growth jumped in August from a year earlier, far exceeding expectations. The PBOC left its key policy rate unchanged while injecting cash into the market for the 10th consecutive month. Still, weakness in the property market remains as prices continue to decline.
The European Central Bank has raised interest rates for the 10th time in a row. Announcing the move to 4%, ECB President Christine Lagarde signalled a shift in gear that could mean the peak has been reached.
The focus is probably going to move a bit more to the duration, but it is not to say, because we can't say that now, that we are at peak.
Many economists and investors had thought that a 4% base rate would be the high watermark. The central bank's new outlook for economic growth shows markedly softer expansion and inflation staying above 2% until the end of 2025 for Europe. Markets have also brought forward pricing now of a first 25 basis point ECB rate cut to June next year in the wake of Lagarde's comments.
The US president's son has been charged with unlawfully purchasing a firearm as his legal issues muddy his father's bid for re-election. After Hunter Biden's plea deal imploded earlier this year, prosecutors have begun to file a case against him. Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin says backing the courts should be a bipartisan issue.
We can all applaud the fact when the system in the courts is working and the justice system is working. And, I don't think people should applaud the system when it works for Hunter Biden, but then try to tear the system down when it works for Donald Trump.
Maryland representative and law professor Jamie Raskin reacting there to Republicans who are calling for more charges to be brought against Hunter Biden. The team investigating Biden's son have signalled that they are considering bringing more serious charges for alleged failures to report millions of dollars in income, including from China and Ukraine.
And lastly, Apple is facing a controversy in France over the iPhone 12's radiation levels. Bloomberg has learned that it has advised its tech support staff not to volunteer any information to customers if they raise the issue. It comes as the French government asked Apple earlier this week to cease sales of the iPhone 12 because tests showed that the device emits electromagnetic waves that are too strong. Apple rebutted the claims and said that it would engage with France to show that the iPhone 12 is compliant. Now, I spotted this on the Bloomberg terminal. Seems that we have a theme this week of the most weird and wonderful jobs that there might be out there for you. NASA has named a new person who's going to be in charge of UFOs, basically trying to find a scientific, evidence-based approach to understanding unexplained events in the sky. We all know that it's a US obsession. It seems to be perhaps a global one. But now there's going to be one person sort of solely in charge of looking at it at NASA.
Interestingly, they won't name the person, which is perhaps so their email inbox isn't filled with reports from people around the world. But it is someone who has worked in the position for a while,
yes,
according to NASA. And now they went on to name him after that, after saying they wouldn't originally. And Mark McInerney is the man. So, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting position to watch to see what he comes up with.
I wonder why, because for decades, sort of NASA's tried to ignore perhaps sometimes unexplained
at least publicly
unexplained objects in the sky. But then they started asking, sourcing the public for information about it, and they want to have apparently a conversation that is less sensational and more about science. So yes, there you go. Strange and interesting jobs in the world.
Indeed, yeah, in our basket of strange and interesting jobs of this week. Let's turn next to get the latest on that move by the United Auto Workers Union, going on strike in all three of Detroit's biggest automakers after pay and contract negotiations failed to reach a deal. Targeted walkouts will affect strategic locations for General Motors, Ford and Stellantis. We've got Bloomberg's Bruce Einhorn with us for more on this story. Bruce, great to have you on the programme. What is this dispute about, and what is it the workers are asking for?
Not surprisingly, to a large extent, it's about money. It's about salaries. The union initially asked for a raise of more than 40%. They've revised that. Now they're down to 36%. They're also asking for reinstatement of pensions and retiree health care benefits that haven't been in place for people who've been hired since the financial crisis, the Great Recession in 2007, when GM, for instance, needed a bailout from the U.S. government. The automakers, in return, have been offering much lower pay increases. GM, for instance, CEO Mary Barra, she's offered a 20% pay raise, which is up from their previous offer of 18%. GM has also offered things like inflation protection and extra money for retirement plans of existing employees. But that's not close enough to what the union wants. There's still quite a big gap between what the auto companies are offering and what the union is asking for.
The strikes, though, seem really particularly strategic and sort of thought out. How much could the strike action cost? The union's also got a big strike fund.
It does have a big strike fund, but it's also a very big union, and that fund could get eaten up very quickly if there were a full-fledged strike against all three of the big automakers in the U.S. Instead, what the UAW is doing is they're doing very selective strikes at the moment. So there's just going to be one strike at each of the automakers' plants, but not at the biggest ones. The UAW does have a strike fund of about $850 million. But if there were a full-fledged strike, that could only last no more than 2 months, maybe even less.
How much of this dispute is about electric vehicles, Bruce?
Well, it is an important issue because electric vehicles just don't have as many parts. They don't need as many workers. And this is an issue that is something that is of concern, not just for workers in the U.S., but also elsewhere, in Japan, for instance. And so the concern is that as more and more consumers shift from gasoline-powered vehicles to EVs, then there is going to be less need for traditional cars, which means that there's less need for all the components that go into them, which means that there's less need for all the workers. The EV plants in the U.S. at the moment, most of them are not unionized. In fact, there's one that's co-owned by GM and LG Energy Solutions from South Korea. That's unionized, but that's stands out as a union plant in a vastity of non-union ones when it comes to EVs at the moment.
OK, that's interesting. It's also part of a broader surge, it seems, in Labour activism in the US. Why? I mean, is this a Democratic presidency? Why is that?
Well, we have full employment in the U.S., right? So that gives workers much more leverage than they've had in quite a while. And we've seen that in action here with the UAW strike. Of course, there's the Hollywood strike with both the actors and the writers on strike. That strike's been going on for months now. We've seen labor action from workers at Starbucks, workers at Amazon trying to organize. The Teamsters recently had a success in negotiating a contract with UPS. Management was able to avert a strike there, but the union was able to get a lot of big wins there. Regarding having a Democratic president, you're right. Having Joe Biden in the White House is beneficial to labor. President Biden is probably the most pro-labor president that the United States has had for decades. So that is something that is helpful for the unions. That said, the head of the UAW has concerns about the Democrats taking the auto workers for granted, and has said that the Democrats are going to have to earn the UAW support if they want it in the election next year.
OK, so a political and an economic issue. Bruce Einhorn, thanks so much for bringing us up to date on that story after that deadline passed only a short time ago for that strike to go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the issue, of course, the rise of electric vehicles, is the need to solve the climate change challenge. And so to a story about airports across the world. They are making changes to their runways and other infrastructure in order to adapt to increasingly extreme weather conditions as climate change takes its toll. Bloomberg's aerospace reporter Kate Duffy joins us for more on this story now. Good morning, Kate. Thanks for your time. How is climate change then having an impact on airports?
So what we're seeing is that climate change is having a profound impact on airports, so much so that it can sometimes disrupt air travel by causing delays and cancellations. And the extreme weather conditions derived from climate change include higher precipitation levels, storm surges, higher temperatures, and this could all destroy airport infrastructure over time. So, for example, the London Luton Airport's runway last year during the heat wave suffered a surface defect. And more recently, sudden rainfall in Frankfurt's airport caused the airfield to flood, almost making it look like planes were parked in a lake. And meanwhile, over in Alaska, underlying permafrost is thawing due to higher temperatures, destroying runways and roads as well. So this isn't just specified to airports in one corner of the world. This is all over.
How urgent is this issue, and I suppose how widespread are we talking? You mentioned some of the diverse locations there, but I suppose how many airports are really looking at this?
Yeah, so those are some of the airports that I spoke to, but there's no doubt that the aviation industry is taking the matter extremely seriously. So Eurocontrol, for example, that's the European Airspace Coordinator, has called on airports as well as airlines to adapt to the more frequent weather conditions that we are seeing. While the Port of Authority of New York and New Jersey, they said that they're on very high alert because of the threats of climate change. And from the airports I've spoken to, it's clear that the issue affects different latitudes, which is why it's so prevalent. And it's obviously important to keep global air traffic flowing, keep it smooth. And if airports don't adapt to the weather extremes in their climate, this could leave them exposed to damage and disruption, and obviously forcing delays and cancellations.
What are airports doing about it then? And also, obviously, the costs must be significant.
Yeah, so different airports are making different adaptations according to the climatic changes that they're experiencing. So in Alaska, one of the measures that they've implemented is slotting insulation into the ground to thermally protect the permafrost, because when it thaws, As I said, this can destroy runways and roads. And in New York, the port is looking to elevate or relocate buildings to other areas of the airport which are less flood prone. And that's because a lot of New York airports are low-lying and near bodies of water. So whenever there's increased precipitation or storm surges, this can increase the risk of flooding. And in fact, JFK is undergoing a $19 billion transformation, and part of that includes adaptations to climate change, such as flood doors. Whereas closer to home, we're having different issues. So in France, Nice Airport has cut back on the amount of industrial water that it uses for cleaning because of a lack of water and higher temperatures. And Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam is tackling the blazing heat by creating shadowed areas and also tackling the higher precipitation by redesigning runways so they're elevated slightly in the center and then slope down towards the sides. So there's different adaptations for different airports, but in terms of costs, I mean, it's not cheap.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.